But I'll take you through, most detail what we would do. So this phased approach starts with phase one at the individual level, and I'll get into these in a little more detail in a second here. But we would come in and assess and educate individuals, figure out, create some baselines, and then from there, educate and try to develop some kind of learning path to develop those skills. Phase two is to develop team strategies. Now that we have kind of a baseline group of people who have general understanding, have probably taken some steps on the path, we need to up the focus to the team level. So I'll talk about, again, what team strategies look like in a moment. And then finally, I say org strategies, it could be department strategies. It kind of really depends on the size of your organization and the degree of change that you're trying to affect. And that may not even be known to you at this point, but we can kind of help you with that through assessing and talking about the areas where emotional intelligence might be effective for you. So let's look at these three phases a little bit closer. At the individual level, again, we start with baseline assessments. Probably some of you, if not most or all of you, have heard of Daniel Goleman. There are many frameworks out there for emotional intelligence. His is the most ubiquitous, and I don't really have any problems with it anyway. So we use that framework. There's 4 competencies, and then beneath that, 12 elements that you would work on. That are essentially, your ability to understand and really manage yourself, and then your ability to understand others and manage your relationships. So there's kind of an internal and external piece to that. Most of us are probably familiar with that. If you're not, sorry to give it such short shrift. Time being what it is, I kind of want to move on. But so we start with a baseline based on those 4 competencies. And then for individuals, we identify growth areas. There's a baseline education that needs to happen so everybody can all speak a common language, but then of course each person's unique. So we would design a learning plan based on that. There would probably be some general trainings that everyone would go through, but then the reinforcement plan, we use a lot of reinforcement strategies and coaching in our learning plan. So those will be specific to the individual based on what we've seen both in the assessment and potentially in any classroom environment. So training, reinforcement, ongoing coaching, and then a final assessment to figure out what changed, what improved. And that starts to, part of what we're doing at Endpoint this whole time as well is also getting to learn more deeply your organization and how it works. A lot of times when you run programs like these, you start to hear in the ongoing interactions with participants, what are the real structural, systemic, or cultural issues at play here that really need some help. And so that kind of informs the planning of the next phase, which is the team level. So we start with managers collecting feedback on emotional intelligence from the team, as well as us. We kind of provide ongoing reporting on what we've seen, where we started, where we've come, what does that mean? But also we want the participants to have an equal voice in their experience. And we want to elevate emotional intelligence to the discussion level, not just some training that you went to that one time, but something that we agree is important to the team. Suggesting that you designate an EI leader who is not the manager. I'm not saying it shouldn't be the manager, but this is an opportunity to empower people. And this can also drive the more democratic aspects of a good learning program. Sometimes it's easier for me to tell my colleague, my peer, how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, than it is to tell my boss. It's not a requirement, but it's definitely, in either case, we want somebody who's kind of going to be the point person for this program. It could be the manager, and in a lot of that, we can make suggestions based on the dynamics that we see in the teams. If you have a more authoritative manager, that may or may not be the right person versus someone who's a little more collaborative, but that's something we can work on. Then we start doing 360 assessments. So we would take teams and have them assess themselves and the other teams that we're working with. So what do you think you're like to work with? What are the things that are important to you? How do you know why, all that stuff? And then ask another team, what do you see in that team over there? What is it like to work with them? What do you think is important to them? How do they like to operate? And the goal there would be to figure out like, okay, so where are the strengths and weaknesses of the team interactions? And where are the strengths and weaknesses of the dynamics within the teams? So then we can start building learning strategies around that. This can include things like team norms for how we communicate with each other, how we deal with conflict. You can get really high level or low level. Every team's different, so the types of team norms, and these are collaborative, co-created by the team. They're different depending on the type of team, the type of organization, and then inter-team norms. There's kind of an analog for this in service level agreements, right? SLAs. So you might talk about, the relationship between the two teams based on the 360 assessment, how we think they ought to work, and then what sort of communication norms and things like that can we create with each other, so that way we can have better communication, reduce conflict, maybe even have conflict management strategies, because we know there's particular areas of work that always create conflict and friction, and how will we deal with those things when those things come up, and then co-create inter-team norms and agreements for how we'll deal with those things. We integrate emotional intelligence into one-on-ones with managers and into development plans. So we integrate some of that initial assessment data and ongoing assessment data, and then we integrate it into the strategic development conversations that we're having. Given what we see coming down the pike for the next, 1 to 2, 3 quarters, whatever, what aspects of emotional intelligence will help you? How do you think you're doing in those areas right now? And how can we make sure that we create space to intentionally develop the emotional intelligence skills that you need, so that as we encounter that new work, you're ready? We also have ongoing group reflection sessions. This is kind of like, maybe you could consider it like group coaching, where again, we're not talking necessarily about the specifics of work. We're talking about the cultural interactions that we're having with each other, the social dynamics that are going on and what we want to adjust with them. Most likely, you would also have continued coaching for individuals. Not everybody's going to grow and develop at the same pace. So, we don't really want to leave people behind. Everybody's just as important as the next. And so we want to make sure that people get the individual attention that they need. And then finally, again, this could be org level, it could be department, whatever scale is most relevant depending on your size and all that. But and this could be you, the EI lead for the org or for the department, et cetera. Again, we're kind of formalizing our commitment to emotional intelligence. So it's not just going to be, I would argue, it should not just be a training class that you send someone to. It should be an organizational commitment to tracking our development and growth in this area. So we would need a point person. Of course, we can take on that role for you, but that we'd have to be pretty deeply integrated, which works too as well. Department organizational feedback systems. Again, a lot of that can come through in development plans. It also comes out of our own data gathering in training sessions, coaching sessions, anything like that. But we need a system to really track the growth. And that's something we can manage for you partly, entirely. It's kind of up to you. I know that's can be some extra work in there. So we can absolutely do that work, but that needs to happen. We need to be able to figure out where we started and where we are, and if it's working and what we need to change or recalibrate. This is something, again, I can't stress the importance of leadership commitment enough. Leadership coaching should start early. Even I would say you can start this at phase 1, but certainly as we start to scale, people won't get behind this unless leadership's behind this too. Oops. And then you can start doing some stuff that frankly everybody enjoys anyway. We call this org wellness programs, but that could be, it's practiced a lot of different ways in a lot of different organizations. Anything from meditation to, you see it all over the place, like yoga programs and, wellness days or wellness events, as well as, inter-team or interdepartmental events. Again, we're trying to deepen relationships and connections. So dedicating time for people to build those relationships that's not just work focused. And I think this most commonly happens at the team level or maybe at the department level, but what we're really trying to do is amplify collaboration across the organization. So we would try to identify, for example, teams that typically have friction or don't seem to collaborate or produce very well together, but it's important that they do. So we would, try to figure out how can we coordinate time for those people to spend time with each other and get to know each other and all those types of things. Our recommended approach for all this stuff is start small, start with a couple cohorts from different parts of the org who work closely together. There's a few reasons for that. Obviously, we want to make sure we can do some kind of change at a smaller scale before we scale it. But also, again, there's a lot of information gathering in the early stages, trying to figure out what exactly is going on inside here. And we can get a little bit of that from initial consultations. But the more time you spend in an organization, the better you understand what some of the barriers are. And a lot of times, people don't even aren't necessarily aware of some of the challenges they're facing until somebody else comes in and says, "Oh, is this a thing for you?" And they go, "Oh, yeah." So start with a couple teams maybe that have to work closely together, and then you kind of expand from there. And the nice thing about that is, it still takes time, but the larger and larger percentages that you're scaling from, you can start to see momentum build as more and more people are practicing these behaviors and developing these understandings. Couple of things to keep in